Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to EWC Research Speaker Series. Thank you for joining this event live, and thank you to those who are watching the recording. My name is Panwin Yoking. I am a research fellow at the East West Center, and I am delighted to be moderating today's session. Our EWC Speaker Series this morning features Dr. Fareena Malhi. Fareena is a lecturer in the Department of Economics at the University of Bath. Prior to her role at the University of Bath, she has over 7 years of academic and research experience in Pakistan at the Lahore School of Economics and also at the University of Punjab. Fareena is an economist specializing in behavioral economics and particularly focusing on gender dynamics. Her research is dedicated to uncovering the root causes of low female labor force participation and also the prevalence of out-of-school children in developing countries. In today's session, Fareena will be presenting her paper that quantitatively investigates whether access to time-saving appliances assists children, particularly girls, in overcoming educational pitfall in Pakistan. And before we start, just a brief note on the logistics. Fareena's presentation will be roughly 40 minutes long. After the presentation, we'll move on to a question and answer session. And if you would like to ask a question, please submit your question in the Q&A box down below. And we'll try our best to get through as many questions as possible. And in the interest of time, I will hand this over to Fareena to start her talk.
Thank you, Wanwen. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'll just share my slides. Okay. Can you see my slides? Okay. So as introduced, I'll be presenting my work titled Time-Saving Appliances and Education Pitfalls, Evidence from Pakistan. And this is a joint work with Hashibul Hassan from Jagannath University and Kingji Su from Oklahoma State University. Okay. So just an overview, I'll be talking about what motivated me to analyze this research question. I'll be looking into the literature, and then I'll be describing what the data looks like, what the samples looks like, and the methodology that we are employing, along with the results, and then finally concluding. So why do we care? So Pakistan has approximately 22.8, which is 23 million children between the age of 5 and 16 who are not enrolled in school. So, and this is a huge percentage, approximately 44% of the total population within this age cohort. If you just look at this diagram, the blue bars are showing you the people who are enrolled, and the orange bars are showing you the children who get dropped based on the grade that they're enrolled, that they drop in. So by 0 grade, we mean the kindergarten, pre-1, and then starts from grade 1 and onwards. So we have primary school, which is one setting, school setting, till grade 5. And then we have secondary school between grade 6 and 10. And then we have upper secondary between 11 and 12. So you can clearly see a huge dropout at grade 5 for various reasons. First of all, it's just that they're just not keen to get their children educated. But it is also because they have to. So when we talk about primary school versus secondary school, primary schools and secondary schools have different school buildings. And it is possible that you're living in a community which has a primary school, but the secondary school is more far off. So the incidence of private schools, the public private schools, is much greater as compared to the secondary schools. Also, within secondary schools, then they are segregated by gender. So the girls would be going to a separate school and boys going to go into a separate school. So there's a high incidence that once this change occurs, lots of families just pull out their children from schooling completely instead of making this transition. So why are school children out of school, especially in such huge numbers? So there are two kind of children who are out of school. First are those who absolutely never went to school. So they were never enrolled, and the primary reason given for those children is poverty. So the parents never send their children to school because they cannot afford it, or even if the public school is free, they would still not be ready to invest in the time in the schooling because they believe it's just not going to pay off, or they just want extra income, which they think their child can help them get through child labor. The second set of children who are out of school are those who do enroll but then drop out, something that we just saw in the previous diagram. 13% of this sample attributes household chores as the primary reason of dropping them out. And this is specifically for girls. So while this, in terms of percentage, this number looks small, it's still, in terms of levels, it's still, we are talking about millions of children who tend to drop out just because they have the burden of household chores that they have to contribute towards. So just looking at it with a gendered perspective, we have a study by UNICEF which tells us um, how girls contribute 40% more towards household chores compared to boys, but that's also what our data is showing. So the orange bar is showing the amount of time on average spent by girls in our sample in the household chores in a particular week, and then the blue bar is showing what the boys are spending. So you can clearly see that it's like at least multiple times more what girls are putting in, and that's why they're more at risk in addition to the other norms that Pakistan has in terms of for girls in terms of education. At the same time, we also see that the Pakistan's ownership within Pakistan, the ownership of time-saving appliances is increasing. So there's an increased exposure of consumer durables and their utility and their ownership. So we see that over a period of time, over a period of 3 years that we have in our data set, the ownership of any kind of time-saving appliance, which is the green bar here, increases from 34% to 45%. So 45% of the households own at least one kind of these time-saving appliances. Excuse me. And the two particular kind of time saving appliances that we are looking into is the blue bar, which is showing the ownership of the washing machine, and the orange bar, which is showing you the ownership of refrigerators. So we do see that there's an increasing trend in the ownership of time-saving appliances. They are becoming more common in every household, and that's why we see that as an opportunity of maybe that could alleviate the issue that we have of the household burden of the household chores on the children, and if that could be alleviated and that could be reduced and have some positive impact on the educational outcomes. So what do we already know in terms of the technological progress or the ownership of the time-saving appliances? So we already know from the literature that owning time-saving appliances has demonstrated to reduce the household work by women and children. We also know that the households where they own time-saving appliances, the women tend to increase their female labor force participation. That's true for developing countries, as shown by Kerr, and also developed countries, as shown by Cohen, Pirani, and al. In addition, in terms of the children's outcomes, what we know so far is that the time-saving appliances owned by the household are is demonstrated to boost the school enrollments for children in China and in India. However, what we do not know, and that's why we are going to look into this, is that since in Pakistan the enrollment is primarily determined uh, by the poverty. So 87% of those who are not enrolled or who never enrolled is because of their poverty. We want to more look into um, the people who did enroll at some point in time, but then they tend to drop out. So we look into how the time-saving appliances is going to affect the children's dropout rates. And the second point, which you can see, you also saw in the diagram that there is a high probability that the children would drop out at the transition points, which is grade 5, when transitioning from primary school to the secondary school, or grade 10, which is transitioning from the secondary to upper secondary school. So these are the very sensitive points, and that's why we call them as pitfalls, where we tend to lose lots of students within this transition period. So that's what we are going to examine in this paper, if the time-saving appliances could help us push through the children from one schooling level to another. So the data that we are employing is the Pakistan Rural Household Panel Survey. It was collected between 2012 and 2014, and it has 3 waves. The data was collected and is owned by International Food Policy Research Institute. We restrict our sample to the households that have children between the age of 6 and 18 years old. That's the school-going age. And so we are analyzing approximately a sample of 1,586 households with 12,415 children across the 3 waves. So just to give you a sense of what our samples looks like, approximately we have 44% of the households who own at least one kind of a time-saving appliance, and 56% who do not own any. We have these households, the sample that we are working with and we are analyzing, the children we are analyzing, approximately 50%, 49% are females, on an average age of 11 years. What you see here, if you could just focus here on the ever attended, we see that the attendance of school is higher in the sample where households own time-saving appliances, whereas it's lower. So it's 88% versus 57%. Then in terms of fathers' employment, 80% across the households, that remains same. Approximately 80% of the households, the fathers are working, and approximately 36% of the households, the mothers are working. And something which is really intriguing here is that in the households where they own time-saving appliances, the participation rate, or the labor force participation rate for mothers, is lower. It's 36% compared to the households where do not own the time-saving appliances, it's 58%. One of the reasons behind this could be the fact that within Pakistan, the female labor force participation is lumped in the households who are less wealthy. Because those are the women, since there is a social stigma attached with female labor force participation. So these are the women who work out of financial need, and that's something that we also see in another paper that I did for time use and other labor force statistics, that the females are primarily working in rural regions, and these are the women who are not educated as such, and that's why they are working. So probably that's what is reflecting here too. But if you look at the durable assets value, you can clearly see that the total value of assets is much higher. So we are comparing households which are much more wealthier as compared to those who are not as wealthy. So we do see some basic social demographic differences across the 2 households that we are comparing here. And so the primary goal is to estimate this equation where our dependent variable is, we have 2 dependent variables. One is the dropout rate, which is a binary variable which tells us if the child if the child is currently not in school, then that would be dropped out, but they did at some point in time, they did enroll in school. And the second is if they were successfully able to transition from one schooling level to another, and that would be both from primary to secondary or secondary to upper secondary. So we are including both of them. So our primary variable of interest is TSA, which is if the household that the child is living in owns the time-saving appliance. And so we're really looking into the coefficient of this variable, which is beta 1 here. XI is a vector of individual level and the household level control variables. And then we are, of course, having Tehsil level fixed effects and controlling for the round time fixed effects. So the problems we're expecting with the linear regression that I just showed you is that the two households, the two kinds of households that we are comparing, the ones that own the time-saving appliances and the ones that we do not own the time-saving appliances, are inherently different. So for instance, we expect that the households with school-age children could be more likely to purchase household appliances due to the extended utility from them. So you have a larger household size. So it could be possibly that you have so much household burden that you would prefer buying household appliances. But at the same time, on the other hand, it could be possible that the households with school-age children are less likely to purchase household appliances because they believe that children can contribute towards the household chores, and that's why they do not need the household appliances. So yes, it's a larger household size, but then they also have a larger number of people who could contribute toward household chores. It's not only the woman who has to do that. So it could go either way. Also, the households with strong preferences for home-produced goods may make just significant investments in both household work and appliances. And we may also expect that the households with time-saving appliances are just inherently wealthier and have different preferences. So there are chances that we would get biased results if we just estimate a linear regression because of these inherent differences between the two kind of households that we are comparing. So to overcome that endogeneity issue, we are going to implement the instrumental variable methodology. And we use average appliance ownership of households without children in the same community. So we are assuming that the living in the same community, the number of households, the average number of households who own the time-saving appliances would be associated or linked with R. And why we believe that is because within small communities, if the more common it is for other people to have washing machine, there's a probability that you would also buy it just because you'll have awareness about it, you'll have exposure about it, you'll hear from the word of mouth of how effective it is, how useful it could be, so on and so forth. So we see that the ownership of these durable goods it does increase with the word of mouth and how prevalent they get around within your neighborhoods. So we expect that if we create a variable which measures the average ownership of the households within the same community, excluding yours. And why we are only restricting it to the households without children, because we also want to make sure that the dynamics of the number of children within the households is not deriving the ownership of the appliances. So that's why we are just focusing on the households without children. Also, we don't expect this variable, which is the ownership of the time-saving appliances by other households within the same community, to be determining the educational outcomes of your children within your own household. So your education decisions of the children within the household are not made by what the household appliance does other household own. So it's expected to be exclusive. It's expected to be exclusionary over there, and that's why we believe it would be a strong instrumental variable. So just to show you the first point, which is relevance there of the instrumental variable. If you look at the orange line, that's the ownership of the time-saving appliances by the households who have children. And the blue line is showing the ownership of the time-saving appliances who do not have children. And that's why we see, at least in our sample, the households who do not have time-saving appliances, they have a higher percentage of ownership of the time-saving appliances. So the first figure is for washing machine, and the second one is for the refrigerator. But you can see that pretty much they both have a very parallel trend. So if the as the ownership of time-saving appliances is increasing in the households with children, it's also increasing without children, especially for refrigerators. So that's why we're expecting that, yes, it would be associated, yet it would not be directly endogenous in terms of the how wealthy that particular household is or what preferences do they have. So for that reason, we are going to estimate a two-stage least squares estimation. And in that, we have a first stage where we determine if the ownership we determine what, sorry, so it's the opposite. We determine what TSA is, and we determine if that is determined by the average TSA or average ownership of the TSA by the community level numbers, and then we use this number, this estimated results, predicted results, to estimate if they impact the educational outcomes of our children. So moving on to the results, this table gives the mean results for three kinds of our treatment variables. The first one is if the household owns any kind of time-saving appliances, that just increases our sample size. But we also disaggregated by the time-saving appliance, the kind of time-saving appliance, to see how each one of them affects it. So if you just look at the first row, owning a time-saving appliance would reduce the dropout rate for all the children by approximately 29 percentage points, and that's a large number. But if we disaggregate by the gender of the child, we see that this effect is being driven by just the girls, and we do not have any impact on the boys. So owning a time-saving appliance would reduce the girls' dropout rates by 64 percentage points, which is statistically significant, and it's huge. So we see, and I think that makes sense, because if we just saw that it's the girls who are putting in a larger amount of, or a significant amount of work towards the household chores, and not the boys. So yes, that reduces their it reduces their dropout rates if the time-saving appliances could take up for the household chores that they are contributing towards. In terms of educational transition, the time-saving appliances is boosting. It has a positive impact on the transition. So it is helping them transition from one level of school to another. And that is statistically significant for both boys and girls. So that's really interesting. But if we disaggregate it by washing machine and owning a refrigerator, we see that washing machine reduces the dropout rates for girls and boosts the educational transition. But if you see, that's really being driven by just the boys, and refrigerators has no impact. So if we want to make sense out of these results, we are seeing that these time-saving appliances are actually reducing the dropout rates for girls, yes, but the push or the moving forward from one educational level to another, from one school level to another, that's really the push that's going towards the boys and not the girls, really. And if you look at the refrigerator again is reducing the dropout rates, but primarily driven by girls, and it has no impact on educational transitions whatsoever. So again, I think that's reflecting the norms that we have in Pakistan, which is, yes, the dropout rates are reducing, which means that if the girl is studying, she would keep on studying, but it doesn't really push the girls to the next level of schooling. It doesn't increase the educational attainment in the number of years as such for girls, but it does for the boys. Now, what we did was we disaggregated the educational transition in the two levels that we have, I just talked about. So we have one is from primary to secondary school level, that's from going from grade 5 to grade 6. And then we have secondary to upper secondary, which is going from grade 10, graduating from grade 10 and going to grade 11. So if you see that the last three columns, which is 4, 5, and 6, they are absolutely statistically insignificant for any kind of intervention. So either it be any kind of time-saving appliances or just the washing machine or the refrigerator, it's statistically insignificant. So all of those transition numbers that we just saw in the previous slides are primarily talking about pushing children or students from grade 5 to grade 6, from primary to secondary school. So that's where they're helping us push, increase the educational attainment. And if you look at the very first row, owning any kind of time-saving appliance would again push the or boost the educational attainment, educational transition for all the children by 37 percentage points, and that number is almost static for boys and girls. But if you look at the washing machine, that's 54 percentage points and primarily driven by boys, with no impact through refrigerators. So it's primarily the washing machine which is deriving the results, and it is coming through the boys. Okay, so now next what we did was we wanted to look how the results are heterogeneous based on what kind of preferences do the parents have? Because of course, if we are talking about children and their educational decisions, especially if you're talking about moving from primary to secondary school, or the dropouts in that age range, then we really want to understand what the parents look like, what kind of preferences do they have. So, and how the decision-making process is going on regarding education in that household. So the first factor that we are looking into is the parents' aspiration. So we have data in terms of what level of educational attainment do mothers and fathers aspire for their children. And so we have divided that into two groups. So we have calculated what the median is, and then we have seen if their aspirations for their children was above the median or below the median, for mothers and for fathers. So I'll just go one by one just to make sure it's making sense. So if you just look at the first two rows, which is 1 and 2, we're looking at where the households where the mother's aspirations are above median. And then we are over here, we see that if the child belongs to a household where the mother's aspirations for their children, the educational aspirations specifically for their children are high, then we believe that all the children, boys and girls, would be able to transition between having access to time-saving appliances, would push the children from primary to secondary school for both boys and girls. And similarly, if we just go to row 5 and 6, that's where the fathers have high aspirations. We again see that this is where the transition would be boosted again, almost the same magnitude, approximately 50 percentage points. So if fathers have high aspirations, then owning time-saving appliances would push the children from primary to secondary school. So we're saying that all the results about pushing the children from primary to secondary school through the treatment of or through the ownership of time-saving appliances, that's basically just driven from the households where actually parents had high aspirations. So they really wanted their children to get higher education. And that's where the time-saving appliances would be really helpful. So if they owned those time-saving appliances in those households, then the children would be able to move to a higher education level. But if the mother has high aspirations, there is no impact on the dropout rates. Rather, in the households where mothers have low aspirations, that's where the dropout rates are really reducing, and that's particularly for girls. So that's again very interesting. So we're saying that the reduction in dropout rates is places where mothers do not aspire really high, for their girls' education, but they're at least making them not drop out before a certain level. So they're at least making them complete the primary. So if they are able to, and if they get that margin, they are able to, they are just going to push them through that particular schooling level, but of course not pushing them over. And that's not significant for boys. Whereas if father has above median, that's if they aspire higher, that would reduce the dropout rates for, again, all children, but primarily being driven by girls. So again, we see the dropout rate is specifically for girls. So the reduction in dropouts is specifically for girls. Either the mother has low aspirations or the father has high aspirations, but the transition is only in households where the mother and father, they both have high aspirations, and that's where both boys and girls can benefit from it. So now we are looking at the heterogeneous impact for the washing machine, owning a washing machine, and we see that owning a washing machine reduces the dropout rates in households where the mother's aspirations are low, but in households where the father's aspirations are high, and this is constant for all children, boys and girls. But washing machines are also able to increase the transition rate, or push the transition rates between the schools within the households where father's aspirations are high. So overall, we see that father's aspirations are extremely critical and crucial in our model, and so they are kind of a deciding factor if their children would be studying more or not. Now, if you remember, in our main results, refrigerator had no impact on the transitions whatsoever. And over here, we see that they do tend to have a significant impact, but that's only in the households where fathers have high aspirations. So yes, owning a refrigerator could be helpful, but only in the households where fathers have high aspirations and they really want their children to get highly educated. And this is the second factor that we want to look into and see if our results are heterogeneous. And that's basically coming from if the households that where the mothers make the decision regarding the education, the child's education, or if they don't. So if the mother's power is 0, that means mother does not play any role in the decision regarding education for their children, versus households where they're either making the decisions alone regarding their child's education, or in or with their husbands. So basically we are looking at households where mothers have a say in educational decisions versus households where mothers don't have a say. And we see that both the dropout rates and the educational transitions, they both have an impact where the mothers have a say in the children's decision making, educational decisions. So the dropout rate would reduce by 26 percentage point, and the educational transition would also increase by 30 percentage points. Similarly, for washing machine, that's again true. The dropout rates would reduce by 55 percentage points, and educational transition would increase by 73 percentage points, but only in the households where the mothers have a say in the educational decisions. And for refrigerator, they again have they boost the educational transition in the households where mother have a say, but more interestingly, they increase the dropout rate. So they could have an opposite effect if the mothers do not have a say. So if you have a refrigerator but mother does not have any say in the educational transition, and father is making the decision, or other household members are making a decision, that could have a backfire. So the owning a time-saving appliance could be a backfire for children, especially driven by boys. So what we may conclude from this paper is that the time-saving appliances could be really helpful intervention in terms of improving the educational outcomes for for the children in a developing country context, especially for girls when you're talking about the dropout rates, but it could also boost the transition rates for boys. However, the results are dependent upon what the parents are thinking about. So we really have to target the parents' educational aspirations, but also what is the mother's say, because of course, when we're talking about the household chores, it's the mother who is relegated with the household work, and it's she who benefits from it. If any there is any benefit and she wants to transfer it to her children, then she needs to have a certain say in terms of the educational decisions within the household. If she doesn't, then I don't think that would have an effect. So we need to keep that in mind when making policy decisions. What we are expecting to extend upon, and I would love your comments and how we could improve this paper. We still have to explore the mechanisms of what is happening and how is this happening. So what factors are being affected to see the results that we are. So we still have to move forward and explore the mechanisms in this paper. So that's all from my end. I would welcome any suggestions or comments. Thank you so much.
Fareena, thank you for the great presentation. And also, I really admire that you did check the heterogeneity of your impact on educational dropout rate and educational transition using parents' aspiration and also women's decision-making power. So right now, we have a few questions from the audience. And I will read out the first question that we have. This pertains to the time-saving appliances. So you're using a refrigerator and also a washing machine as your key independent variables. Would a gas stove be considered as a TSA compared to a burning stove? If you could elaborate on that.
Yes. The access to gas is not very common in Pakistan. And so a gas stove would only be helpful if you get the gas connection. And so knowing what kind of energy they're using and how that would impact. Two reasons why we did not do it. One, there are already papers which are very similar and have worked upon it, but also the gas stove is so getting the gas connection within Pakistan. So, for instance, if we already have gas supply within our community, but just getting the connection to your household, there are a lot of political and bureaucratic layers to it. So we cannot just say that, oh, it's because they got it because they're wealthy or they're not. And so it's not like an individual decision. And that's why it's difficult to, isolate that given the data set that we have. So that's the reason that we did not incorporate it. But of course, that could make a decision because that could make an effect because, of course, there is a lot of time spent in fuel collection and wood collection and when they make those. But yes.
Okay. Just to build on that a little bit, this is my own question here. Given that I believe on your slide number 6, you're showing the increase in the use of time-saving appliances over time in the context of Pakistan. So given the steady increase in the appliance ownership in the context of Pakistan, what drives your emphasis on time-saving appliances over other factors such as access to basic infrastructure, water, electricity, for example, as a potential strategy to enhance children's educational attainment and also to minimize the dropout rate? Can you elaborate on that just a little, the motivation behind picking time-saving appliances as a key focus?
Right. So I have, in terms of electricity, that's more common. So that's not a problem as such. So approximately, I think we have around 90% of the households who are having access to the electricity. So having an electricity is not something that is stopping women or increasing the workload, at least in terms of household chores. But yes, in terms of water access, it's not as good, but it's still around 70-75% that we have. And I think I already have a separate paper, not on educational outcomes, but well, the time allocation of women and children. And there we see that it does reduce the household work, but it doesn't improve the time spent in education as such. So of course, over there we're not looking at the participation rates, but just the time spent in particular activities, right? So, but that's also an interesting to see that it's within the household. So again, in Pakistan, we have multi-generational households. So within the household, the dynamics and the effect of having access to water is very different across mother-in-law to daughter-in-law and the daughter. So that's also very interesting to see. But unfortunately, I did not find any impact on education or increasing the time that they spend towards learning. So that's a separate paper. But over here, since we did not have any impact, the data on the time spent in enrollment, sorry, time spent in education. So I did not explore that particularly here. The time saving appliances. So I did not upload the public infrastructure that we're talking about are the two primary ones that you said. One is the fuel. So we have the allocation to gas, which I just suggested why we didn't do that. But the second is water access, and then that is also something I just explained. So I did it in a separate paper. So the reason why we are doing time saving appliances and particularly refrigerator and washing machine, because these are two most common time-saving appliances that have been utilized, that are being owned within the households in Pakistan. And also they also contribute towards the most commonly household chores. So of course, the most time within the household chores is taken by cooking and cleaning, and the second one is washing and laundry. So we expect that if refrigerators could help in reducing that household work towards, or the time allocated towards cooking, if they could store food, cook once and store food. But also there are papers in the literature which have demonstrated that there could be a backfire. So you have a refrigerator, but that also means that you start cooking more because now the demands are increasing within the household. So yes, so the reason why we chose these two particularly time-saving appliances is because they're the most commonly owned.
Another clarification question. When you say that any appliances in your tables and your graph, so this means is basically either washing machine or refrigerator is one of the two, right? It's a dummy variable. It doesn't include any
Yes.
other appliances.
No, it doesn't include any other. So we wanted to keep it clear in terms of just these two, and that's why it's when we say any, so we mean any of those two. So it could have washing machine or refrigerator or both of them.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
We'll move on from your choice of time-saving appliances. And our audience has two questions. One is a comment. I'm reading it out, so it's incredibly interesting. This analysis could be expanded to other contexts. Do you have any plans to, expand this to other areas of focus or other contexts?
Right. So I was really interested in expanding it to other South Asian countries because the context within the South Asian countries is very similar. It's been done. A similar work has been done for India, which they looked into the dropout. No, sorry, not the dropouts, but the enrollment rate. So maybe I can use and expand it to that if the educational transition is happening. But Bangladesh was one country where nothing was done and there wasn't any similar study. But unfortunately, the ownership of appliance, the data on the ownership of appliances is not there in their data set. So they have an amazing panel data set with 3 waves, and it's more recent with the 2019 wave. But it is something that we didn't have data set. But yes, we are exploring more. So we found mix, which does have a data set on the ownership of appliances, but also on educational outcomes. and their data on educational outcomes is far more detailed than what we have here. So they even have data on the learning outcomes of children. So we are thinking of expanding to other countries, because mix is more common in also in like African countries and Asian countries. So we are thinking of expanding the study to other developing countries, hopefully.
Okay. Just building on this keyword of expansion, and you mentioned that there's time use data. So I'm wondering if you are also, in addition to the dropout rates and also educational transition, are you also looking at how the time-saving appliances affect the amount of time that children spend on educational activities? For example, the amount of time that they spend on doing homework, or the amount of time that they spend on going to school, because I think that would be, a good robustness check to verify how it affects children's involvement in education.
Absolutely, and we so wanted to do that, but unfortunately, the time use data that IFPRI collects within their data set is collecting the time use on very limited categories. So it's on the primary household chores, and the time they spend in subsistence and paid work. So it does not have any data on the time spent in learning or education or travel for that matter. So yes, we're losing out on that, but yeah, I'm hoping again mix doesn't have time use data, and the time use data that we have do not tend to have strong socioeconomic data sets to make it a very robust study. So yes, it's kind of a trade-off, to be honest.
Okay, got it. We'll move on to another question from the audience, and this pertains to the background in the context of Pakistan. Is education mandatory by law for boys and girls in the context of Pakistan?
By law, yes. Is it implemented? No. So, so yeah, while the laws exist, it's never implemented, and we have a huge number of students who are out of school. They are so especially rather there are now lots of donor agencies who have invested in programs like giving stipends to students to incentivize them to come to school, or give them free bags and books and uniforms, or and things like that. So basically, in addition to the law, there have been lots of incentives in place, or programs to bring these children back to school. But again, even if they are able to, it's like they are unable to retain it. That is partially attributed to the quality of these public schools. So while private schools are expensive and you have to pay it out of your pocket, and the donor agencies don't invest in there, the public schools have a really low quality. And so those parents really, if they are even pushed to send their child to school, either they are not motivated enough, or the parents themselves, the child, or they just think that it would just not pay them off in the long run, because again, the employment prospects are low, the economy is weak, and there's so many factors contributing towards it. So yes.
Female labor force participation in the context of Pakistan is one of the lowest in Asia, basically.
Yes.
Let's move on. Well, I just want to share with you that the president of the East West Center, Susie, I don't know if you can see the comment. She attended the presentation, and she said she enjoyed the presentation. I just want to point this out, and we'll move on to the next
Thank you.
comment. This is just a comment that
Okay.
you can check the Population Council, Pakistan's 2001, 2002 data on time use of young people. I don't know if I'm actually not aware of this, that there's a time use data set from the Population Council. Have you checked that out, Fareena?
No, that I haven't. Pakistan itself has a time use data set for 2007.
Okay.
But and I have worked with it. As I said, I looked using that data. I examined if access to water could affect the time allocation. But then in terms of the other social demographics, that data set is so weak that I really, in addition to associations, I really cannot find anything else. So nothing causal that could be established using that data set. But yes,
Okay.
that does give us a sense of what the time allocation towards learning looks like.
Yeah, and based on my previous publishing experience, I think having a recent data set is highly crucial in order to see how the trend changes over time. So one of my suggestions to you would be actually to test how your results, to check the sensitivity of your results using a more recent data set to see whether the trend is still the same, whether the negative effects on dropout rate is still, hold for the more recent data set using 2019 data set that you mentioned, and whether the positive effect on the educational transition still persist. Another comment, it's not related to your presentation, but it's a very interesting question focusing on machine learning. How do you plan to use machine learning in your other research? Because you mentioned that you're exploring machine learning in your research.
Yes. So there are various ways that I'm doing it. So in one of the projects, I'm using machine learning to conduct a heterogeneous analysis. So there's this paper where I'm examining if unconditional cash transfers. So Pakistan has one of the largest unconditional cash transfers program by the name of Benazir Income Support Program, and that's targeted towards females. So there's a lot of literature on how if we could push the aspirations, that means that there's a long-term impact. And if the aspirations are boosted, that mean that, as also shown in this paper, they have a forward-looking view and they are willing to change their circumstances. So I'm trying to see if these women who get unconditional cash transfers, if those unconditional cash transfers are boosting their aspirations. But more specifically, what kind of behavioral traits? Because of course, aspirations is connected with behavioral traits, like what kind of risk awareness do they have? What type of time preferences do they have? What do they think about their circumstances? Do they think their circumstances are under their control or not? Can they change them or not? So all these things. So we have lots of very rich data within the same data set in terms of behavioral traits and aspirations and risk and time preferences. So I'm trying to use machine learning to identify what kind of traits would make those cash transfers transformative in the long run. That means would push up the aspiration. So that's one place where I'm using machine learning. Another place where I'm using machine learning is in terms of that's more of an intervention in terms of job search. So there I'm using artificial intelligence to be more accurate. So we're thinking of making a platform where we could use artificial intelligence to support these girls who come out of the university or college. So in Pakistan, ironically, we have gender parity at tertiary education. That's awesome. So we have 55% women and 45% men in universities who graduate. However, that's not reflected in female labor force participation. As you just said, it's just the lowest in the South Asia, right? So these women do graduate, but they never enter the labor force. So we're thinking if artificial intelligence could train them or help them transition from school to work. So if their school to work could be improved using that, because we do have very weak career counseling services, especially in the public sector. So yeah, that's another place where I'm using. Apart from that, I think machine learning is just a field that has started blooming. So there's a lot to learn and a lot that needs to be done there. So hopefully I'll be on that path.
So we all need to upgrade our skills and incorporate machine learning into our analysis. We have about 6 minutes left, so I'm going to maximize our time allowance that we have. I don't see any questions, so I am just going to ask you my questions. But if the audience has questions, feel free to type that out in the Q&A box, and I am closely monitoring the Q&A box. So just going back to your paper and focusing more on, the definition of dropout, I'm wondering what criteria in your analysis determines whether a child is considered a dropout in this particular study. Can you just elaborate on that, as well as the how do you determine the educational transition? Because essentially, educational transition is a function of the dropout variable. A child cannot transition into the next schooling level if he or she has already dropped out. So essentially the two variables are very similar, and I suspect that two variables are there's a high correlation between the two variables. So can you just elaborate on the definition of each variable and how you determine the criteria of a dropout?
Absolutely. I think you're correct in saying that they're overlapping. Rather, educational transition is a subset of dropouts. So
Right.
yes, a child could drop out at any grade, any age, and that's what the graph shows. Um, so the definition, to be very accurate, the definition of dropout is so there are two questions in the data set. One says, did you ever attend school? And they say yes or no. So if they say yes, that means they did attend school at some point in time their life. And then they ask you, are you currently a student or are you currently enrolled? And then they say yes or no, which means either they are going to school right now or not. So the dropout would be anybody who said yes to ever going to school. So they did attend school, but currently they are not enrolled. So that's a dropout. So we don't care which grade it is, when did they drop out, what's their highest educational attainment, as long as it's a yes to the first question and a no to the second question, we consider them a dropout. So that's dropout. But educational transition, again, it's people who are going to school but then are currently not enrolled. But here we are specifically looking at the subset who were in year 5, which is grade 5, in one wave, and in the next wave they were supposed to be in grade 6, but instead they have said that we are not going to school. So for those are the students who we consider they were not able to transition, versus somebody who's in grade 5 in 1 year and the next year they were supposed to be in grade 6 and they are still enrolled, which means they were able to successfully transition. So that's one subset. And similarly, we also look at the transition from secondary to upper secondary, which is from grade 10 to grade 11. So yes, this is a subset of all the dropouts, but this is particularly to capture the complexities of transitioning from one school to another, because especially when we talk about girls, it's not only about moving one grade ahead, it's also a huge change in terms of going to a school which is much further away. How do you manage to go to school? What happens? Does your parents do your parents allow it or not? And things like that. So of course that means much more than just adding up another class.
Got it. Thank you. We have another question from the audience. And we have also 2 minutes left. So this is going to be my last question to you. Is the quality of electricity supply good enough for good penetration and the use of electric time-saving appliances, particularly in rural areas? On top of that, yes, I'll let you answer that question first.
Okay, so yes, a quick answer is yes. We did have a problem of load shedding, which means the electricity would cut out for a few hours, but that has been taken care of in the last few years, and it's not that you wouldn't have electricity at all. It's just that it would go out for 1 or 2 hours or 3 or 4 hours maximum in extreme remote areas, and that's so people work out their schedule around those, because those are probably announced and when it's not going to be there. So yes, people work it out around those timings.
We have 1 minute left. I'm just gonna state my last comment to you for your presentation. I think it would be interesting to take a look at how the time-saving appliances affects the dropout and transitional rate by rural and urban areas, because I suspect that there might be some differences, because in the rural areas of Pakistan, gender norms is more rigid than the urban areas, if I understand correctly. Another comment is you might want to check, I believe on slide, your descriptive statistics on slide 10 and slide 19. There are several variables capturing wealth, income, assets, household wealth. Those 3 variables, there might be some issues with that. The first issue is endogeneity. it might be closely correlated with the dropout rate and educational transitional rate. And the second issue is those three variables might be closely correlated. They're all capturing wealth. And so you might need to be careful when you use all those things, because
So
one
we did
variable
create an index. Yeah, we created an index for the regression, but we didn't put in the index in the tables because that didn't make sense, you know. So
Okay.
it's difficult to interpret it. But yes, in the regression we put it as a wealth index, combined them
Okay.
as in one
Sounds good.
index.
Okay. And one last comment on the wealth is that
Yeah,
when you have the household savings or wealth, you might want
yeah.
to adjust it based on the household size, because larger households
Mm.
might have larger amount of wealth versus small households. So there might introduce bias in your model. So that's something that we should pay attention to. But that's it.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so unfortunately, we were running out of time, so we have to end here. So I would like to thank you very much, Fareena, for sharing your work with our audience today in the evening of your time in the UK. And I also would like to invite everybody to our next talk by Futoshi Asawa and also Maiku Narasawa on coastal communities, livelihoods, and climate leadership in the context of Japan. And thank you again, everybody, for joining us this morning in Hawaii and evening in the UK, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great talking with the
Okay.
audience. Thank you. Take
I will
care.
send you my comments.
Definitely looking forward to it. Take care.
Okay.